Chanukah, everyone! I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and tonight is night 2 of the 2020 ChemKnits Chanukah special, where each night I am sharing a new dyeing project, and it is so much fun. Tonight we are going to take a little trip back in time and do some solar dyeing back when it was still 80-90 degrees in New England. What is solar dyeing? Solar dyeing is when you're taking advantage of the heat of the sun as your heat source to dye your yarn. Remember that to dye yarn with acid dyes, you need a protein-based fiber, like wool, which we'll be using today. You need your acid dyes, acid in the form of vinegar, citric acid typically, and then heat. And most often I use my stovetop or a steamer basket to set the color, and that can happen in a short time scale of 20 to 30 minutes at times. But with solar dyeing, I'm taking advantage of the heat of the sun, and so using a much longer time scale, things absorb slowly. And some people really enjoy this because you can take advantage of limited stovetop space to dye more colorways. So what's the difference between solar dyeing and cool vat? Because both of them involve setting things up and then waiting a long period of time. Well, there isn't that much of a difference, honestly. The main difference is that when I'm talking about solar dyeing, my goal is to use the heat of the sun as the heat source. Sometimes when I'm doing a cool vat technique, I am using that heat from the sun to set the color. But usually when I'm talking about cool vat, I am planning to set the color in some other kind of way, adding heat from another source. The length of time is just to give a chance for the color to absorb and usually to help me set up more projects than maybe I could on my stovetop. So, short answer, solar dyeing when I'm intending to use the heat of the sun to set the color, and cool vat when I guess is the broader category of where I'm just setting things up and waiting a long time. But now let's go back in time and look at tonight's project. Our goal is to have the sun set most of the color, but if we see bleeding, we'll go ahead and steam set the yarn and give it that extra heat. That's not a problem, but we will be layering our mini skeins into jars and layering them with some Dharma acid dye powder. Today we are going to be using Brilliant Yellow and Frozen Blue. I picked these two colors for a few reasons. One, the Brilliant Yellow has done really well with some solar dyeing projects I've done recently, and I know it spreads beautifully throughout the yarn and fiber. Frozen Blue is an awesome bright blue. It gives great greens when mixed with yellow, but it does strike to the fiber a little bit faster. And so I think that combining these two, we should have a beautiful mix of hues in our yarn. I thought it would be fun to take advantage of these mini skeins, or as Wool to Dye For calls them, micro skeins. These are 10-gram skeins of platinum sock or platinum DK, which is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon. I am not going to pre-soak them, and I think for today's project we're actually going to leave them twisted. So this bag has 25 micros, so that's 2.5 skeins. All right, just a test. Let's see how many, and I'm immediately stuffing too many in. We'll do it more ordered when we start layering the dye and the yarn. Let's see how many of these twisted minis we can reasonably, okay, so that's 25, and maybe we could fit a cup, or sorry, that's 20 of the 10-gram minis, so 200 grams of yarn, and I believe this is a 2-liter jar, and these are 1-liter jars right there. And let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Okay, so fit about 100 grams in each of these smaller ones. The plan today is to layer the dry powder and yarn into these jars and then pour some water with acid on top of them. This will allow these colors to spread out in a really, really fun way. And in fact, the first water we add might have no acid to encourage some spread, and then we'll add acid with the second round. I found that that kind of technique gives beautiful coverage on our yarn. And since these are twisted, we could have some really fun resist in here. So I'm excited about that as well. I do have a really fun video on roving where I added vinegar to one batch and no vinegar to another. And so you should go check that out, and you can see the difference in the way the colors spread and set. Since we're dealing with dye powder today, I'm wearing a respirator mask and safety glasses. And all of the tools and equipment I'm using are dedicated for dyeing yarn and aren't used for food. Okay, I'm going to start off layering in 3 minis. This one has decay, this one fingering. And let's start adding a little bit of some frozen blue. Since I'm not measuring the dye, it is not going to be even on the different colors, and that is a reality of this setup. Okay, let's add 4. And there's a limit to how I'm able to layer these colors in the jar as well, just because of how I can pack it in. Okay, and let's add some yellow now. And things will get more compressed as we go. Okay, and let's do another 4. Okay, and we're going to do some more blue. There's a chance that we'll just end up with a lot of greens in here, but I'm hoping for some more color. And, you know, and I got some blue powder stuck at the top there, which is fine. Okay. Although, as we add the next batch of 4, I sort of wiped that down. See, now is when some more compression is coming. Pushing down. Okay, some yellow. And I am really excited. Adding a bit more. The goal, I don't want to dump it in huge clumps because then it might not dissolve, and that's something that can lead to bleeding. Okay. And then how many do we have left? Okay, we have 5 on both left. Let's add 3. Could probably add more, but I don't want to, could probably add more, but I don't want to overcrowd it. I do want to allow for some spread in here. I think, so Frozen is definitely one of my favorite Dharma acid dye colors ever. It's a beautiful bright blue. And I've ordered more of it, thank goodness. But I think it's going to be the first acid dye color that I ever run out of. Okay. And then we've got our final 2 minis. And I'm going to close up the blue. And now we're going to add some yellow on top. So I'm hoping to see multiple shades of different colors. This isn't going to be a gradient setup, but there will be, like, you would be able to create a fade set out of these mixtures and combinations just due to the nature of the way that things are not going to be identical throughout. But now let's go get some water. All right, let's start by adding 1 cup
of plain tap water. So that's half a cup. And what's different about this, try pouring in the middle, is that the colors are running down the yarn, and there's dye pooling towards the bottom. So unlike if this were just fiber, where we might see some of that, interesting, I see more running down on this, and I'm seeing more soaking in on the fingering. That is interesting, and it could just all be with how they are packed in. Did I add 2 cups to this one? I feel like I did. All right, let's start bringing in some acid now. In this cup, I have 500 milliliters of water and 1 tablespoon of white vinegar. And I'm gonna pour it down the center of this. And there should be enough for me to do 1 full cup of that. Wow, I love how different this is looking on them, just the way that they've been packed. Ooh, I see some cool teals there. In this one, I see some mottling, but I'm seeing a lot of green. I'm excited. Things are nice and wet, so I removed my respirator. I'm gonna have another tablespoon of vinegar and then fill this up with water. I am excited. It's so funny because you can see how the yarn is compressing itself in the fingering weight and the DK is staying more separate. There is a bit of a difference in like the twist and stuff, but I didn't anticipate there being so much of a difference in the way that the yarn behaved and sort of layered in. And I am very excited. I mean, can you see? I don't want to move it a lot, but the yarn, the top of the yarn is right here, and the top of the yarn is still up there in the DK. That is wild. And it might not be the yarn itself, it really just might be how I've packed things. Okay, I'm gonna do, I guess I'll do the vinegar mixture 2 more times since there's 2 jars. That'll allow there to be a total of 2 tablespoons of vinegar in each jar as I make a little mess. But the question now is, do I add equal amounts of water to both? Or just until the yarn is covered? Because I could absolutely fit a lot more yarn in this one. I'm pretty sure I added the vinegar to this cup, but I'm not 100% positive. Okay, let's do 1. I am so curious because I think that there's probably not as much color towards the interior there. These just look, I guess I'm seeing more greens in here, but they still look vastly different to me. I wonder if it'll uncompress as we add the rest of the liquid. I don't know. Because this one feels like it's filling up a little bit, but there's no way that there's liquid all the way to the interior. Right now I'm just adding plain water, and this might be rising back up. So the water levels are actually fairly similar. I will say there is something incredibly fun about doing a technique that I love in a way that is just different. It would be really fun for me to do this in a way where I layered the colors to try to intentionally get more of a fade than what I did today. But since these minis are going to be wrapped and then put in multiple different samplers, I wanted to have just slightly more consistency. All right, I'm now going to just fill up the jars with water, and the yarn did spread back up as I added more water in here, and not all of the yarn is submerged there yet. Come on. Well, I think that's going to be as good as it can get. And wow, these look so different to me. I don't know if you guys can appreciate it, because I think your side looks more similar, but what I was seeing was that. And so how cool is that? The amount of variety that you can get. And I wouldn't say this is because of the yarn bases. I would say that this variety is due to just the way that the minis were layered in. But now we are going to put our lids on, and I am going to go carefully bring these outside so that way they can be outside and in the sun for a while. It is about 10 a.m. on a Sunday on a partly cloudy day. The area where I have the yarn doesn't get full sun all day, but today I'm not going to move the jars around to follow the sun like I might sometimes. Instead, I'm going to leave them outside for multiple days, just to give everything a chance. And funny, I see bubbles in the DK. There are some bubbles in there that are moving up to the top as more of the yarn gets wet and that air sort of goes up. I think I might need to come and add more, not more vinegar, but more water to it at some point. There are also some bubbles in the fingering weight jar, not as many, and the colors aren't as mixed as they were in the DK. But maybe it's just something about how the yarn soaked up the liquid. But I'm excited, nevertheless. Well, I mean, I'm always excited, but you know what I mean. I am now officially going to stop moving these jars, because the more you move them, the more the color sort of dissolves and moves around. I wonder at the bottom. That was looking very pigmented. But yeah, I'll let you know if I end up adding more liquid to the jar, or maybe I should just leave it, and if we get some more white on skeins, that is what happens. But I do have more minis to dye, so let's go and set up a few more jars. In past solar dyeing projects, I've left yarn outside, for 18 hours or even up to a week. I found that with no vinegar, the colors sort of stopped spreading as much within the jar after a matter of hours versus days. In that project, things didn't look sufficiently different after a week checking in than it did after 6 hours from when I had set it up. So I don't think it necessarily makes a huge difference if you stop at 18 hours, at 12 hours, or at, 2 weeks from when you set it up. But the thing that could make a difference is that the length of time you have the yarn exposed to heat could help the colors be better set. I think that what can cause bleeding is if some of the powdered dye is a little too thick and it doesn't all dissolve, and maybe it gels a little bit where it's located. And so then it needs to be rinsed out later. And so because it never went into solution, that was where, in my opinion, more of the problem came from in the past. But back to the layering that's going on right now. I have 5 1-quart jars, and I am going to add 10 mini skeins to each of them. The layering of colors this time is therefore going to be different from what I did when I had more minis that could go into the jars. But I am still really excited about what we're going to see with these colors. Once everything was layered, I added half a cup of plain tap water to each jar. Then I mixed 1 tablespoon of vinegar in the 500 milliliters and added more volume until we had about 1 tablespoon of vinegar in each jar. At least that was my goal. I'm surprised that my observations of how the yarn was soaking up water were so similar with the DK versus 4 fingering weight jars. And I don't think I was treating them that differently. But do we need, can we add? I mean, it just keeps floating up and the top one isn't getting very wet, which I guess it's just gonna be the way that it is. I don't know, again, if I'm gonna add more water to the tops. I'm inclined to just let it be the way the yarn wants a little bit. But otherwise, I did layer 2 skeins, then some blue, then 3 skeins, some yellow, 2 more blue, and then the last 3 and some more yellow at the top before adding on the liquid. I did notice with some of the first blue that there's a lot of color down at the bottom in some of these jars. And again, that is really the way that it is. When I've done this with adding part of a skein in at a time and adding powder, we were able to get more coverage along the bottom, whereas here there were just a lot more gaps. But anyway, I'm just wiping things up a tad, and then I'm gonna go put these outside next to the other skeins. It is overcast at the moment, and sorry, my neighbors have like their inflatable bouncy water slide thing running. But yeah, I've got the 2 jars with DK over on the right, and then the 5 with fingering towards the left. It'll be hard to say what the differences may or may not be as things go on. And of course, there's always a chance that there is more dye added on one than the rest, and so that could influence what happens with these colors. But again, we're gonna leave these out for a few days. And so that should equilibrate if we have some more sunny and less sunny days, but there's also a practical reason for this. I had to grab my sunglasses because although it is overcast, the sun is right up there and it is bright. Right now it is August 2nd. And so this video is gonna feel almost a little bit like a time capsule since we're watching it now in December. And I have no idea what the world is gonna look like even a month from now when schools are supposed to start, whether hybrid or remote in Massachusetts. But I do know the reality is that my children will be home with me, whether full-time or part-time, a lot more than what they would have done in years past. And so leaving things outside also just for multiple days gives me some additional flexibility as I am dyeing, whew, my glasses are getting steamy, as I'm dyeing 900 grams of a colorway per video. I always start dyeing for Chanukah in July and August anyway, just to give plenty of time since it is a large volume of yarn, and the videos can typically take longer periods of time. But I'm prepared with some of my plans to add some flexibility in, but I'm also hoping to take advantage of the warm weather as long as possible. And the one outside regret I have is that I never planned well enough in advance for Chanukah to include some snow dyeing in Chanukah. So maybe I should start thinking about 2021, but probably not. So anyway, I thought that it was worth giving like a little time capsule moment in this video instead of just the Chanukah vlog or something, because it's sort of what we're living through. But I know that I'm going to be able to create many beautiful colorways for Chanukah, and I really hope if you have the samplers that you enjoy unwrapping them each night. And I know, well, I'm going to get my own surprise moment. I love doing stuff like this because you never quite know what it's going to look like, and we don't know if each jar, how different they might feel. So I'll try to keep each individual jar together through washing so we can look at it that way as well. It is now Tuesday morning and the day promises to be relatively stormy, but I hope to bring these in while the kids rest this afternoon to finally open up and wash. I rinsed most of the dirt off of one of our DK weight jars and one of the small fingering weight jars. And now let's open it up and see. So first, well, there go the minis. There is a little bit of color down on the bottom. I will probably have to scrub these jars, but I'm going to add some liquid into it right now so that can soak. But I think that means we might see some bleeding when we start to rinse these minis. And yep, there is some, but hopefully it won't be too bad. In my opinion, some bleeding because we had some undissolved powder is very different from bleeding because the color wasn't well set. And so I am optimistic because this is not bad. I think I'm going to rinse these a few times, and then we will untwist them. This is just 2 rinses later and the water is clear. So I am very optimistic. And we absolutely have gradient, or we'd have a beautiful fade set in here. As I open up the minis, I'm gonna combine them onto a removable nylon zip tie. Come on, show me where an opening is. There we go. This will help prevent things from getting too tangled, while also allowing us to keep the ones that were in the same containers together. I really like this deep one right here. It is gorgeous. And while wet, if you're having trouble finding where to open them, look for one of the ties and that will help. Ooh. Look at this variegated beautifulness. We will definitely take a closer look at everything when it's dry. I'm gonna go and finish opening these up. I'm not sure if I'm gonna open up all the rest of the others while they're wet. It was a lot harder to keep a good handle on it. But now let's add some clear dish soap to the rinse as we do a final bleeding check. And I think that might be some blue coming out. We'll add a little more soap, just to be sure. Might be some light bleeding. Yeah, we're definitely seeing some bleeding. Okay. I'm gonna go and soak this and then wash it off camera for a little bit, and depending on how long this bleeding carries on, then we'll decide if we want to go and steam set the rest of what we've got. But yeah, that's some bleeding. But these colors are pretty. And I guess the other thing I wanted to point out is we have blue, green, and yellow in the fingering weight. It didn't take long to rinse to clear. I think that unwrapping the skeins could have exposed some more powder that hadn't fully dissolved. Let's test though with a little bit more soap to see if this causes a lot of bleeding to happen again. And I'm seeing a little, It's not bad though. I think we're pretty good. One of the problems with solar dyeing is this like uncertainty at the end. And so it could be worth using like the mason jars as a method to apply the color, but maybe I just run into more problems when I'm using the powders. So I should try this again using like liquid, but the problem is the liquids start to strike. So I don't have a great solution over the best way to do this, but this is looking really, really clear. So I am going to call it for this fingering weight yarn. And now onto our DK, which is looking really, really green. Let's see. I also see a little bit of blue down at the bottom. This isn't something that I always see, but I think that because some dye hit the bottom, that might be where we're coming into that issue. And yeah, I see some frozen particles sort of in this water, and we will rinse this a couple of times to make sure all of that comes out. And then I'll come and start opening them. But if you look at this, there are some more yellow and more blue, but overall, oh, that's not bad at all. That's already clear. Overall, the colors mixed a lot more, and I'm not entirely sure why. But we only had 2 jars with DK, but oh yeah, that's clear. We only had 2 jars with DK, and we observed this in both of them. Okay, so now let's unwrap some of these. Oh good, I'm encouraged. Oh, that's so pretty. All right, I think rather than trying to put them all in the zip tie at once, I'm gonna open it like that. This one even has some blue speckles. The green is gorgeous, but it's amazing. I thought that maybe it was just the way I layered it in one of the jars, but it really does seem to be like a DK versus fingering weight difference. Maybe because of the number of strands and just the way that the liquid hit the yarn and it just pooled the colors a lot more at first. I don't know. Because the fingering weight yarn sort of soaked up the liquid faster, whereas the liquid on the DK seemed to pool more around the yarn and sort of rinse the dye a bit more towards the bottom. And I think that's why we see a lot less blue, distinct blue overall. But I mean, clearly there's some blue there. We have that right here. And so I still think that these are beautiful. Certainly I feel like we've got a fade in here. But let's do one rinse since they're opened up without soap. Ooh, that's so pretty though. Oh, this is looking good. Okay, I'm not seeing bleeding. Let's add some soap. And this is looking pretty good, I have to say. Maybe like a hint of something. But even so, even though I'm like, oh, we're seeing some bleeding, like on camera you can barely see it and it's not affecting the color on the yarn, but I will go ahead and rinse this a number of times off camera. But you can just see some of the color difference already. But then I will put this through the spin dryer and hang everything up to dry. And I think maybe I'll do a time lapse of opening the big ones, but otherwise I think I will wash the rest off camera. The outside of our larger jar was a little dirty, but I did the same kind of thing. I washed the minis, still twisted a bit. There was a tiny bit of bleeding, a tiny bit of color left at the bottom of the jar, but the rinse water poured out was clear. So if the dye could dissolve, it then absorbed to the fiber. I actually added a little bit of soap to the twisted skeins, saw a tiny bit of bleeding, but then I untwisted everything, added a zip tie, and washed with soap, and there really wasn't any bleeding. So this is great. This is sort of confirming to me that that bleeding we were seeing is a result of there being some undissolved powder in the jars. And so again, we'll need to think about more how to mitigate that in the future, and maybe think about the color selections that we pick, so that way we know that we pick things that dissolve super easily for this type of technique. I rinsed off the outside of the big DK jar before dumping it out, and yeah, again, we see a little bit of blue dye on the bottom, and we had some bleeding. I added soap to the twisted skeins again, and then washed, and the untwisted colors, again, with the previous DK are a lot more green with a few hints of blue and yellow versus feeling more balanced of the yellow, blue, and green that we saw with the fingering weight yarn. And so I think it's really interesting, and I'm excited to see these dry laid out to see if we see any differences with the amount of white left in these mini skeins as well. I like dyeing these minis twisted because even though that adds some resist and you get some cool variegated colors that way, since these micro skeins are so tiny, it's not that much resist and you can get color all the way through a section because a lot of the strands are still exposed on the surface. But anyway, the water went clear really quickly here too, thank goodness. So we finished washing and I put everything to the spin dryer to hang up to dry. I considered trying to use the leftover color at the bottom for some leave no dye behinds, but it actually isn't dissolving that easily. You can kind of see the particles floating around, so instead I'm just going to scrub these. A lot of times when I film videos like this for these special series where I'm dyeing both fingering weight and DK weight yarn, there's not a ton of difference between the fingering and DK unless I did something completely different with them. But today, our DK is substantially more green than our fingering weight yarn. And I suppose that instead of saying more green, I should say that it's less yellow. There's absolutely still green in our fingering weight yarn, but the main difference is that we have more skeins that have that bright yellow and bigger patches of the bright blue. And the color blended more on the DK. We observed as we poured water on top of these jars that the DK yarn might just be slightly less absorbent right away. It seemed like the water was running over the yarn, therefore dissolving some of this dye and pooling it together, whereas our fingering weight yarn sort of soaked that water up faster, and so the dyes didn't move as far because it wasn't just running over the edges and around all the yarn. And I just think that was really, really interesting because in a lot of other, as I said, videos I've done for these types of series, I don't notice such an extreme difference in the colorway. And it wasn't just a fluke of once, because we saw this twice, both when I used a larger container or smaller container with these twisted mini skeins. And the mini skeins were commercially twisted. I did not retwist them. So yeah, but let's open these up, twist them up, and get a sense of the range of colors that we saw inside some of these jars. Here we have our fingering and DK sets. And I think now you can really see the more yellow versus less yellow, especially because of the way we applied the color. Now, the way that these skeins are arranged isn't the way they were in the jar because we layered blue, then yellow, then more blue, then yellow in our jars. But we did have yellow on top. So these skeins and these skeins were very likely the ones on top. And our big difference here is that when we poured the water on, a lot of that yellow dye just went boo down. And here, some of it didn't, even though we didn't add acid right away, which allows the colors to move a little bit more. So now I guess you can see. And if I had only done this as more of a gradient, then maybe these changes would be even more extreme. I'm not sure, but they definitely feel related. They definitely work beautifully together. But there are those differences, which are really intriguing to me. I had so much fun putting this project together. I always enjoy setting up solar dyeing projects. And I also really enjoy trying new things with mini skeins. And I haven't tried layering minis in a jar like this before. And I'm very happy with the coverage of color that we got. We got these really highly variegated skeins because these minis were twisted. So if we got a large patch of blue on one end and yellow on the other, because they were twisted, then you end up getting these shorter sections of color, which are really, really fun. There are absolutely more ways you could layer these minis and dye in a jar. You could start off with the minis wet. versus dry as we did here today. There's so many different ways you could play with it. How would you like to try this out? Let me know down in the comments below. There is no question that I am super into cool vat techniques or even leaving the yarn outside at times when I'm not calling it solar dyeing. When I'm going to call it solar or sun dyeing, I really am in those cases trying to use the heat of the sun to set the color. In some of the other cases, I let the color set, but then because of the amount of pigmentation or some other factors, I decide to steam set it after the fact. You could absolutely have gone and steam set these skeins, but it isn't always completely necessary as long as the days are hot enough and you leave the yarn out long enough. If you live in a region that isn't super hot, you could try leaving your jars on like the back window of a car, which might still heat up really high in the winter and things like that.
Wow, I did not remember that I filmed that little time capsule moment back when I originally filmed this in August. It is now the end of November. So seeing that moment was really interesting for me. Quick update, school is going great. We're taking things 1 week, sometimes even 1 day at a time. But the 4 humans in my house are managing really, really well. And so we have a lot to be thankful for. And I'm continuing to be able to film content. So we'll see what the new year and what January will bring. But I know that there's lots of beautiful colors coming. So please make sure that you are subscribed to the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel and turn on your notifications so you don't miss a new video. I am releasing new videos every night of Chanukah, plus some bonuses after the 8th night, and you don't want to miss any of it because there's also my regularly scheduled videos coming out along the way, and it's all going to be so much fun. For me, the most fun part about solar dyeing is the way I layer the colors into the container and seeing how they spread. So this technique does not really have to take advantage of the heat of the sun to get the colors to bind. As I mentioned, I found that the colors don't really spread much more after around 6 hours. So you could completely wait a day, see how the colors spread, and then start heating it up. Add the mason jars into a water bath of some kind, and see what happens. So there's many, many options, and depending on where you live and how hot it is, there's different ways that you can take advantage of this type of technique. And I know that I am hoping this winter to take a look at these solar dyeing type videos, but with a winter friendly inside way, because the way that the colors spread is, again, the most exciting part to me. So cool vat or solar dyeing, both of these involve a long span of time typically. It's really just, when I call it solar dyeing, I'm using the sun as the heat source. That is the biggest difference for me, but I think moving forward, I'm probably going to be going more with the cool vat approach and just going ahead and steam setting things just to be completely sure. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and happy Chanukah, everyone! I have so many links down in the video description where you can find me on social media and ways that you can help support the content here on the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel. I have an Etsy shop where a lot of the yarn I dye in my videos ends up, and I have a Patreon. You can find links to everything down below in the video description. And stay tuned, because what are we going to create tomorrow night? I cannot wait for you to see the beautiful colors. Thanks so much for watching.